Okay, hi guys. So since I did Hitler yesterday, today I'm gonna be doing the American Civil War, which might be a topic which you guys might not know about, might know about. I don't know, but yeah. Sorry. So about that, so Lincoln was president, then he got assassinated and all of that. Even before the war ended, he was killed. So we're gonna be doing the American Civil War Part 1. Sorry about that. Yeah, good.
This video was made possible by NordVPN. Click the link down below to get 70% off an annual subscription, plus an additional month free.
Yeah, and he always lets out the hair thing, so yeah.
Also, stun your friends, turn heads, get compliments. Buy yourself some Oversimplified merch today, along with a very honest new character pin.
Yep.
Link in the description down
Lincoln in the description.
below. Okay, Mrs. Lincoln, this is it. One last push, and we're done. 9 months and 4 days ago, my father brought forth upon my mother himself and gave to her a child, conceived in a shack in Kentucky and dedicated to the proposition that I will drink num-nums from a bottle and do little poo-poos in my pantses for the next 2 to 3 years. Now what is it babies do again? Oh yeah.
Yeah, Lincoln wasn't close to his father, but his mother died also fairly young, so he wasn't a really close standing with his family once his mother died.
I'm not touching that. Abraham Lincoln grew
Kentucky. So there's Kentucky Fried Chicken. KFC's full form's Kentucky Fried Chicken, and he was born in Kentucky. So yeah.
up with his relatively poor family in Kentucky, eventually moving to Indiana, and finally, Illinois. He read a lot of books, worked a lot of jobs, wrote some questionable poetry, and finally...
Wait, let's see that poetry.
He read a lot of books, worked a lot of
Vampires Hunting for Dummies.
Wrote some questionable...
Abraham Lincoln is my name. With my pen, I wrote the same. I wrote in both haste and speed, and I left it here for fools to read. Actual poem. That's
poetry, and finally entered the law profession. Despite being self-taught, he turned out to be a pretty clever and astute lawyer. In one case, a guy claimed he witnessed a murder at night, and Lincoln was like, "How could you have seen anything in the dark?"
Yeah, and could we not go through the scene without saying Batman's on the wall?
There was a bright full moon. A what? A bright full moon. Can you say that again, please? There was a bright full moon. A dim half moon? No, a bright full moon. That's funny, because according to this almanac, there was a dim half...
Okay, Old Farmer's Almanac, it's a picture of Benjamin Franklin, and I don't know who that is. Can anyone comment who that is? On the August 27th, there was a... Okay, that's just exactly what he said.
Moon that night, which makes you a liar.
Yep.
Well, I got a bright full moon for y'all right here.
Wait, but that's not a half moon. That's a crescent moon. Firstly, that's not a half moon. That's a crescent moon, and yeah.
Now that's what I call a rebuttal.
Rebuttal.
Lincoln and his cheekbones weren't only interested in law, however. He also dabbled in the world of politics, serving as a legislator in both local and
Oh yeah, so this is Washington. This is Marquis de Lafayette.
National assemblies, and what a time it was. Yeah. Not even 100 years after the...
And there was a lot of tension amongst American parties. Like the Democrats were largely in power, and then the Republicans were formed in the mid to late 1850s, and then they rose to power after Lincoln became president. Then most of the presidents since, I mean, after Andrew Johnson, who was the president after Lincoln, there were no Democratic presidents. Actually, wait. Woodrow Wilson was the first Democratic president. He served during World War I. He was the first Democratic president to serve 2 terms. Ever since Andrew Jackson, who was president in the 1820s, so it was like 100 years. Well, Grover Cleveland served 2 terms, but non-contiguous. Okay, this is Patrick Henry. This is Samuel Adams, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, John Jay, and yeah, Big J Dickinson. I forgot his name, but his name was J Dickinson. Well, I took that reference from the American Revolution, so yeah, they put the names for these guys.
The founding fathers wrote all men are created equal. Politicians were already asking, yeah, but what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, there was a question of slavery at the time then.
It means all men. Yeah, but what does that mean exactly? And not just that. States' rights versus the federal government.
Okay, I want to see which states do.
That mean exactly. And not just that. States' rights.
Okay, states' rights. So this is Georgia, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. Then this one, I don't know this one, and I think that is Connecticut.
Versus the federal government. What are the executive powers of the president? Is cereal a soup? The founding fathers left some of these questions perhaps a little too open to
The biggest one of them was slavery.
interpretation. And the biggest question of them all was slavery, an ugly mark on what should have been a revolutionary new nation based on liberty and democracy. Thomas Jefferson had written
he had slaves, but he had written a condemnation on slavery in the Declaration of Independence. But then that was removed for fear of offending southern colonies, which had slaves. And not all of America had slaves. Some northern states, such as Maine, Massachusetts, New York, Pennsylvania, they didn't have slaves. But even some states which didn't rebel had slaves, such as Maryland, Delaware, Kentucky, and Missouri. So it was only mainly the South that had slaves. The South, basically the Southeast. It was most of the Southeast that had slaves.
condemnation of slavery in the Declaration of Independence. But out of fear of losing Southern states' support, it was removed. Hey guys, do you think leaving this a little vague will create any unforeseen
It'll create a lot of unforeseen problems in the future, which will split your new country into two.
Problems in the future? Cannonball! And those unforeseen problems were now beginning to rear their ugly heads. As the nation developed, the North and the South developed along two very different lines, and two very different...
Kentucky had slavery, so basically, at the time, if you... so the South had... the South had a slightly smaller size than the South and North are of comparable size, because the North had this and this, but the South had this, and they were of comparable size, since if we only go by states, easily the South can take North, since these also had slavery. So
different cultural identities emerged. Northern cities began rapidly industrializing, while the southern climate allowed for large plantations of labor-intensive crops. As a result, one half of the country didn't rely on slaves, while the other half had become economically dependent on them. In 1793, Eli Whitney's cotton gin...
and slavery would have died a natural death if Eli Whitney's cotton gin was never invented. Slavery was in a slow decline. Then once they stopped the slave trade, it was 100% going to go as long as the cotton gin wasn't invented. But a decade before they stopped the slave trade, the cotton gin was invented, which then led to slavery booming in the US.
Caused the slave trade in the South to explode, while in the North, a growing abolitionist movement was taking root.
And the North had, in the early stages of the country, the South had most of the population. Virginia was the strongest state, and it just had most of the population due to that. But the North, after, like half a century after America was independent, maybe in 1833, the North and South are pretty similar. Then 20 to 30 years later, North easily outnumbered the South, 2-1 at least.
General mistrust began to develop between the North and the South. as Northerners felt the South were hell-bent on expanding slavery, and fear spread throughout the South that the North wanted to take their slaves away. In 1819, there were 11 free states and 11
That
slave
was a
states.
balance.
A perfect balance. A happy medium. A harmonious relationship. Hey guys, nice to meet you. I'm Missouri, and I would like to become the 23rd state. Hey buddy, welcome to the nation. We'll be happy to accept you as a free state. Oh no, you don't. You're trying to get one over on us. Missouri's gonna be a slave state. Okay, listen, why don't we just ask Missouri what it wants to be, and we slave state?
Yep.
Well, then, allow me to introduce.
Yeah, and then that when they always add states in pairs. So they are already added of these. So when Missouri was added, Maine was originally considered a part of Massachusetts. But then they made its own state. And also something which I wanted to point out, the Missouri Compromise. So Missouri is the only slave state after that which is going to be above the line. Even though Kentucky, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware had slaves, no more states out west could have more slavery. No more states out west, and that rule was actually good because Texas didn't have any slavery. So yeah.
Introduce to you the newest, freshest state on the scene, Maine. Hey, you can't do that, and you can't have any more slave states above this line.
Yep.
What? The issue.
This is Arkansas. The territory wasn't state yet. It had the Indian Territory. When Andrew Jackson becomes president, the Indian Territory becomes its own territory, and Arkansas becomes state, I think.
Of slavery is solved, and it will never come up again. A few years later, it came up again. You see, as America expanded westward, each new state or territory that was added threatened to upend the delicate balance between the slave and free states. If one faction managed to outnumber the other, it could gain an easy majority and force its own ideals on the opposing side, leaving a huge portion of the population feeling spiteful and oppressed.
When most of the borders in the east
Side,
of the US,
leaving a huge portion of the population.
Yeah, no, this is not really related to what I'm talking about right now. Most of the borders in the east and the Midwest come from the Mississippi. So it goes here, then it goes here, then the southern border is also Mississippi, then it goes here. It actually runs through Pennsylvania. And then Maryland's borders with Virginia, I don't think are any result of the Mississippi. But yeah, Mississippi here stretches as far as Montana, which is here. So that's long distance.
Feeling spiteful and oppressed. For a while, compromises kicked the can down the road and kept the volatile balance in check, as new free and slave states were roughly added in pairs. But then one loudmouth state just had to barge in and ruin everything as usual. The addition of Texas saw the United States.
And Texas was much bigger at the time. I mean, Texas was as far north as modern day Wyoming, which is somewhere around here. And modern day Texas borders are only about here. So yeah, that was a lot more territory than we originally had.
States enter into a war with Mexico.
Today it has a lot less territory than it originally had.
Mexico, which they won, gaining a huge amount of land out west and creating even more.
Yeah, and then they purchased this from Mexico. And they actually purchased all of this western land. They purchased it.
Problems. Hey guys, nice to meet you. I'm California, and I would like to become the 31st state. Hey buddy, welcome to the nation. We'll be happy to accept you as a southern slave state. Oh no, you don't. You're trying to get one over on us. California.
In the entire war until, in the whole time of slavery, California, largest free state.
It's going to be a free state. Okay, listen, why don't we just ask California what it wants to be, and we can free state.
Yep.
Well, then, allow me to introduce to you the territories of New Mexico and Utah, able to freely vote.
New Mexico and Utah territory took away most of Texas
for slavery themselves. Hey, you can't do that, and we can enter Northern Territory anytime we want to recapture escaped slaves. What?
I'm talking a lot right now, but the Fugitive Slave Act was basically an act passed that allowed southern bounty hunters to go and chase down slaves which had escaped to the north.
Issue of slavery is solved, and it will never come up again. A few years later, it came up again. In 1854, a Democratic senator from Illinois wanted to build a really cool choo-choo train here and proposed that the territories of Kansas and Nebraska be created open to slavery, even though they were clearly above the Missouri Compromise line. Obviously, the northern states were like, hell no. But the Southern Democrats who controlled Congress at the time were like, well, if you love liberty and democracy so much, then you should let them vote on whether slavery should be legal or not. And so it was. Huge numbers of pro- and anti-slavery settlers rushed to Kansas to sway the vote in their favor. And while they were all there, they began to beat the
and that kickstarted the violence of bleeding Kansas.
Crap out of each other. One of those settlers was a man named John Brown, a former businessman who failed at just about everything.
Yeah, and he went insane after that. Almost insane. He was a radical. He was an abolitionist. He was one of the members of the Underground Railroad.
He tried and went arguably insane. He was a radical abolitionist and dedicated much of his life to the Underground Railroad and freeing
slaves.
Slaves. One night, in revenge for an earlier raid by pro-slavery forces, he and his sons
that was basically like a mini civil war there.
The number of pro-slavery settlers in the territory, helping to kickstart years of violence known as Bleeding Kansas. Kansas and Nebraska both eventually voted in favor of outlawing slavery. But from here, the tension began to grow at a rapid pace. In 1852, author Harriet Beecher Stowe penned Uncle Tom's Cabin, a best-selling novel that exposed the terrible cruelty of slavery to the world. Oh, how awful. How morally corrupt a nation must be to allow
England outlawed slavery in the 1830s, so
such things to happen. Your Majesty, what should we do about all the starving?
Yeah, but they never outlawed, well, they outlawed child labor, but they didn't outlaw at the time of Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Children working in the coal mines.
Yep.
Nothing! In 1854, the Republican Party was formed, and Abraham Lincoln emerged as a leading figure.
Yeah, but Lincoln wasn't their first nominee. Their first nominee was a man named John Fremont, I think. I don't know, I forgot his name, I'll just check. Okay, so here we are, the first Republican candidate. Yeah. Accepting the Republican Party's first presidential nomination, John C. Fremont. Yeah, he was the first nominee. I'll leave a link to this page in the description if you guys want to check out about this. I'll leave a link to this in the description, and the link to the original video also in the description.
Southern Democrats viewed the new Republican Party with mistrust, believing it to be radical and abolitionist. In 1856, a politician named Charles Sumner gave a speech in Congress, calling out slave-owning Democrats with fiery language. If slavery was a woman, she'd be an ugly one, and the senator from South Carolina would like to boink her. Representative Brooks, do you have a rebuttal?
And Representative Brooks absolutely almost murdered the guy. He caned him with his cane, and his cane actually broke. This cane right here, it broke while he was smashing the guy up.
Oh, I have a rebuttal, all right. Yeah, here's a rebuttal for you. Oh, come on. Surely this isn't allowed. I don't know. I'll have to consult the rulebook. I can't find anything about caning a political opponent, but it says here I'm not allowed to wear women's underwear. Uh-oh. News of the violence on the Senate floor took the nation by storm. Southern slave owners sent Representative Brooks new canes to replace his now.
And why so many? Candy cane. Fantastic. Okay. He came, he saw, he conquered. He came. Julius Caesar once said he came. I came, I saw, and I conquered. But now he said he came, he saw, and he conquered. Who's old? We're mint condition, I don't know.
A broken one. And on the floors of Congress, politicians carried weapons in self-defense, which is
just futuristic, but
never a good sign. In 1857, the Supreme Court ruled in the Dred Scott case that all people of African descent, slave or free, could not be citizens, and therefore could not sue for their own freedom under any circumstances. Undoing years of progress with the strike of a gavel. Now, within all this bitter debate over slavery, there were many nuances. North versus South, Republican versus Democrat, states versus the federal government. But let's strip all of that away. For 4 million...
and in some states, the slave population literally outnumbered the white population. Like in Mississippi or Louisiana or then Tennessee, I don't think so, but Yeah, I think in Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida, and Alabama, they all outnumbered the regular white population.
In individuals living in America, this wasn't about political intrigue or party alignment. It was about the basic human right to be free.
Yeah, and they're considered as property, not even humans. And then there was the three-fifths of a person type thing where slaves were considered three-fifths of an actual white person,
Men,
an actual person actually.
women, and children were stolen from their homelands and brought to the American continent, where for generations they were considered to be property.
Most slaves came from Africa, but few came from India, few came from the Americas. The ones who hadn't died of disease came from the Americas. Yeah.
To live in poverty and work from sunrise to sunset. Plantation overseers did whatever they felt was necessary to get the most out of their slaves. Punishments were often barbaric.
Yeah, and most plantation owners were actually nice to their slaves, but however nice you are to them, like you let them live in your home, you let them get dressed the way you are, you're like not nice to them since you don't give them freedom.
Families were regularly separated, and parents could often only watch as their children were auctioned off.
Okay, so what if you're a parent and you see a child being auctioned off? I mean, that's how it felt to them.
Never to be seen again. Thousands of slaves took the treacherous risk of
Yep.
running away, and abolitionists
The
in the
exact Underground Railroad I mentioned. And then when the bounty hunter thing was there, they couldn't even escape to the north. So then their only option was Canada. Since Canada was part of the British Empire, and the Brits had outlawed slavery.
north helped many escape via the Underground
Yep.
Railroad as bounty hunters entered the north to chase them down. Leading figures within the abolitionist
Frederick
movement
Douglass
included
and
many
Harry
significant free black men and women. But it's important to note that for many of the anti-slavery white individuals in the North, opposition to slavery
Yeah, it
was
modern.
often an economic issue, not a moral one, as many worried large plantations would take their lands
Sorry, I
and
mean it's
livelihoods away.
economical, not moral.
Abraham Lincoln knew that slavery was a moral evil, and he regularly spoke out against it in powerful speeches that helped.
Even though he thought slavery was more, people who were considered to be not racist and abolitionists were at today's view they are considered to be white supremacist and racists. They thought Lincoln even thought that whites and blacks would be seen as equals. Whites would think they're superior, and that was true for the next 100 years.
him rise through the ranks of the new Republican Party. He lamented at the hypocrisy of a great American nation meant to stand as a shining beacon of freedom while also enslaving 4 million men, women, and children. He most famously declared in 1858 that a house divided against itself cannot stand, that one day slavery in America would end. However, even Lincoln was cautious in his opposition. He didn't want to outlaw it entirely, but simply prevent its expansion, so that given enough time, he believed it would naturally die out. Thankfully, history would force his hand. In October 1859,
Yeah, John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry happened in October 1859.
one abolitionist
So I think they're going to talk about that. Actually, many of his sons were killed in the raid of Harper's Ferry. So, yeah.
decided he'd try to single-handedly take down slavery by force. Who would be crazy enough to even attempt such a thing? Ah, it's our good friend, John Brown.
Yeah.
He planned to seize arms from an armory in the town of Harper's Ferry, free the slaves there, and continue south, inciting a major slave uprising along the way. A noble cause, a bad plan,
Yeah,
and terrible execution. Brown's men took the armory and some hostages, but were quickly surrounded by one Robert E. Lee and his U.S. Marine.
And he wasn't a general at the point. At that point, I think he was a lieutenant. I don't know.
Brown was captured, and a couple of months later,
Yeah,
he was executed for treason. Northerners sympathized with Brown, but Southerners were like, "You see this? They're coming for us. Soon, there'll be 1 million John Browns." 1 million John Browns?
Yeah,
What on earth are you thinking about? A John Brown farm? Yeah, me too. To make matters worse, new northern free states
Yeah, Minnesota, Oregon, California, and Wisconsin.
Now, the southern states really were outnumbered, and they were beginning to feel bitterly spiteful and oppressed. Further,
You might think, wait a minute, how are they outnumbered? Like, come on, just more states doesn't mean outnumbered. Well, they were outnumbered in the Senate. In America, I don't live in America. I don't know much about American politics. I told this in my other video. But each I read a book about Barack Obama, and he mentioned in that book saying that each state gets 2 representatives in the Senate. So now the North had 36 at that point, while the South only had 30. That's why they're feeling outnumbered.
Further fear began to spread in the South when news broke that a relatively unknown figure had just secured the Republican Party nomination
It's on
for
paper
president.
slaves.
Abraham Lincoln,
Yeah.
mostly well-liked among anti-slavery Northerners, had made some of the most powerfully worded
And he was elected as a Republican nominee, then he becomes president. I'm sure they'll get to that at some point.
speeches against slavery of any politician at the time. And now, there was a chance that he and his cheekbones could become president. For the South, that would be too much. In the 1860 election, Lincoln's name didn't even appear on the ballot in 10 southern states. But much to their horror, when the final results came in, Lincoln had
and the Democrats had split the vote with Breckinridge, Douglass, and Bell. So Breckinridge was the Southern Democrat representative. He was the best guy who was not Abraham Lincoln. Then Stephen A. Douglas Breckinridge was the Southern, and then Douglas was the Northern representative. And then the Constitutional Union, which I think was just to keep the country together, was John Bell.
won by an electoral college landslide. Lincoln himself
Won by 108 on the second guy, so yeah.
tried to calm their fear. How many times do I have to tell you, I'm not gonna take away your slaves? Yeah, right, Honest Abe. We've had enough of you Northerners. We're gonna go form our own country. You can't do that. Why not? Well, if you had won the election, would it be okay for us to leave? Of course not. Well, why not? Because that's not how victim mentality works. Many states felt that when they joined the Union, they always withheld the right
They want
to
to guess all 3 states. Okay, let's go from here to here. So Wisconsin, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania. I think this is Vermont. Yeah, that's Vermont. Then Ohio. Then this is a part of Michigan. And this is Michigan. Iowa, California, Illinois, Minnesota, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Maine, Indiana, and this one's New Hampshire, I think. And this one is which one is it? No, this is Oregon. This is Oregon. I know why it's just portrayed bigger than other states. That's why I got confused. Okay, now for the southern ones. Well, slavery ones. So Florida, Tennessee, South Carolina, Virginia. Virginia hadn't broken up into East and West Virginia yet. Well, East Virginia is basically regular Virginia, but it hadn't broken up yet. Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana. Then this one's Georgia. Then Alabama, Texas, North Carolina, Delaware. Then Missouri, Kentucky, and Maryland actually is not divided into 2. It has like a 9-mile strip or something. So yeah.
Leave it whenever they pleased. Many people living in 19th century America often felt more loyalty to their state than to the nation. And now, with the South feeling like it had lost its voice in the federal government, they were out.
Yeah, and these ones were the ones that did not secede.
Here. South Carolina was the first to go, and over a period of 6 months, one by one, 11 slave states officially seceded from the Union, with just 4.
And so even before Lincoln had taken office, South Carolina already had formed the CSA. And one last thing which I want to tell is that it's only the Deep South that secedes early. Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Tennessee. Actually, sorry, not Arkansas and Tennessee. Then, it's Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina. But North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, and Arkansas only seceded after Fort Sumter, which started the American Civil War.
Contested border states opting to remain. The seceding states issued a number of official documents justifying their secession. South Carolina proclaimed that it was northern states' hostility.
Increasing hostility on the part of the non-slave holding states to the institution of slavery has led to the disregard of the obligations and laws of the general government have to succeed in the effect of, in the, to affect the object of the Constitution.
Hostility to slavery that rendered the federal
Declaration of the immediate causes which induce and justify the secession of South Carolina from the Federal Union in 1860.
government illegitimate. Mississippi declared that their position was thoroughly identified.
Our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest of the world.
With the institution of slavery, and in a speech, the Confederate Vice President stated that the new Confederate government rested upon what he called the great truth of racial inequality. Revered American generals such as Robert E. Lee.
Lee wasn't a general yet, and he lived just across the river from Washington, D.C. And Washington, D.C. was like on the border of Virginia and Maryland, so yeah.
Opted to side with their states over the Union. And with all the chaos, one New York lawyer wrote that rather than a bald eagle, America's national bird should be a debilitated chicken. And hey, I kind of like that. One man, watching the crisis unfold, knew it would be his job to solve it. Lincoln was just about to hop on a train and become the President of the United States of America.
And
hey man, you're hella ugly. Grow a beard or something to hide that face.
That was the person who
Good
made
idea.
Lincoln grow a beard.
Still ugly. With assassination plots already underway, Lincoln had to travel to Washington, D.C. under heavy disguise and protection. All along the way, he received stacks of threatening letters. May the hand of the devil strike you down. You are destroying this country. Damn you, every breath you take. Love from Grandma. At his inauguration speech, Lincoln once again reiterated that no, I do not want to take away anyone's slaves. But for Lincoln, he did want to preserve the Union. He declared secession to be nothing but an illegitimate rebellion, in your hands and not in mine.
Is the momentous issue of civil war.
He said, is the momentous issue of civil war. You can have no conflict without being yourselves the aggressors. We are not enemies, but friends. It was clear Lincoln was ready and willing to get freaky and open up a can of Scatman John if he had to. Whether he had the support of the people, however, was in question. In the end, it was the Confederates that fired the first shot. As they seceded, the Confederate states began seizing federal U.S. property throughout the South. Off the coast of Charleston, South Carolina, was one such federal property, Fort Sumter, held by a measly, undersupplied U.S. force. The Confederate militia there demanded the fort surrender, a request which was quickly denied, and any remaining hope for a peaceful solution to the secession crisis probably then died when the Confederates did this.
Yeah, and the first deaths in the Civil War are actually accidental. After Fort Sumter surrender, their men fired cannons and 2 men accidentally blew themselves up. So, yeah.
The Battle of Fort Sumter is considered to be the beginning of the American Civil War. Many of the
and Oklahoma was like a border territory. Both countries had control of it at one time. But yeah.
Confederates there also considered it to be the end of the American Civil War. They hoped old Abe would just sigh and say, okay,
and
you
many
win.
people didn't
Unfortunately for them, Lincoln actually said, you're about to get a roundhouse to the face.
Lincoln
sent out the call for 75,000 volunteers, and men signed up in droves, hopeful for some adventure and good old-fashioned F-U-N. In the new Confederate capital at Richmond, Virginia, Confederate
they should have made it New Orleans, but New Orleans was captured by the Union. Thanks to the Union's Anaconda Plan, which starves the Confederates out. And currently, Virginia is not even close to the most powerful state there. I mean, there are some states that have overtaken it. So it's Florida and Texas.
President Jefferson Davis and his cheekbones had also sent out the call for 100,000 men. As ever,
he kind of looks a lot like Lincoln to me. And both of them came from Kentucky. You can blame Kentucky and Jefferson Davis, but you can compliment Kentucky and Abraham Lincoln. I don't know about Kentucky, but yeah.
Both sides hoped for a quick end to the war. Is it over yet? No, Jimmy. It's been 1 week. Is it over now? No. How about now? If you ask that one more time, I swear I will turn this army around and you'll all have to go back home to your wives and
children. Yeah, and most of them actually wanted that.
Children.
Yeah.
But in particular, the South knew the conflict would pose a bit of a challenge.
Population.
How can we expect to win with a population of only 5 million against 20?
5 million if you don't count slaves. If you count slaves, it'd be 9 million. And 22 million in the north.
2 million in the north. If you count us 4 million slaves, you'd have 9 million. Great idea. Hand these rifles out to all the men. Wait a minute. You almost had me there. The problem for Lincoln was that many of his top generals were getting old and were being a bit too cautious. The commanding general was a man named Winfield Scott, a veteran of the Mexican-American War, and by now, he was too fat to even mount a horse. Okay, chaps, we need to come up with a plan. Hit me. We could wait for the Confederates to come and apologize. Maybe we should all sit in a circle and discuss our feelings. Crossing the Delaware into New Jersey.
Wrong episode, and that's picture Thomas Jefferson there, and that's Washington, that's Lincoln.
For me, those are all terrible ideas.
Yep.
And you? Wrong video.
Yep.
Hey, I'm the greatest president in the history of this nation. Yeah, we'll see about that, dingus.
And it's debatable who's the greatest president in the history of this nation. There are 4 main candidates: Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin D. Roosevelt. And then there's also George Washington and Abraham Lincoln.
Eventually, Lincoln's generals came up with a multi-pronged strategy. First, a blockade would cut off and starve the South of supplies by sea. Secondly, taking control of the great Mississippi River would sever the South's economic artery while splitting it in two. And finally, a main Union force in the East would move south and take the Confederate capital, ending the war. Bada boom, bada bing. Skirmishes began to break out across the nation, and the Union Army in the
West
East began to move south.
Virginia, which is this area, which is now West Virginia, actually seceded from the Confederates and rejoined the Union.
South towards Richmond. Everything seemed to be going well until they reached Manassas,
So
where they came upon a large Confederate force. It's almost like they were waiting for us. How did that?
Yeah. So normally the Union named the battles after some natural thing, like the rivers or the forests. But the Confederates named it after a city. The city was Manassas, and the river was Bull Run. And spies, well, yeah, the spies are from. The Confederates, I think. No, yeah.
They know. As it turned out, spies in DC had sent a coded message to the Confederates warning of the invasion. Did you use NordVPN? What the heck is... Oh yeah, suspicion. That man and the Union invasion into Virginia.
Yep.
The two sides encountered each other at Manassas and both geared up for the first major battle of the Civil War. The first battle of Bull Run. The Confederates rapidly brought in support via rail, and the two sides were about equal in numbers. However, they were also equally inexperienced.
There hasn't been a main war since 1812, actually 1848, the Mexican-American War, but most of the veterans were now old, most of the veteran soldiers. That's why most of them were inexperienced, and rail was very important in this war, especially for the Confederates. Since they knew the population would stand up, they kept moving armies wherever needed. So, if Grant was attacking in, let's say, Mississippi, then Grant stopped attacking, and then General Meade started attacking Virginia. Then they could just move them by rail. It'd take like 5-6 hours, and then they could go back. And also many civilians also came. They thought this war would be after this battle, the Confederates would surrender, the Union would agree to a peace, and the Confederates would be independent. Well, they were in a huge surprise when that didn't happen.
A large number of civilians also rode out by carriage from DC to picnic on the nearby hills and watch the excitement unfold. Nobody seemed to quite understand how destructive this war was going to be. The Union forces pulled a flanking maneuver to hit the Confederates on their left, and the two sides fired on each other in rows. Farm families living in the area were forced to flee the fighting, including a man named McClellan. Hurry up, Martha! There's a war out here! The more you tell me to hurry up, the slower I will go! The Union force saw initial success pushing the Confederates back to Henry Hill, but one as of yet fairly unknown General Thomas Jackson had arrived, and he took a defensive position, standing firm like a stone wall, holding the Union army off, and finally sending them running back to Washington, D.C. with heavy casualties. The sobering reality of war hit both sides hard, and the North, having just lost the first major battle, had to face the serious prospect that they may not actually win this war. President Lincoln, General Jackson...
and until that point, it looked like an easy North victory. But then after that battle, it looked like a southern victory. But then after Vicksburg and Gettysburg and all that happened, then it was assured it was going to be a northern victory.
Jackson whipped us so hard, the Confederates are calling him Stonewall
Jackson.
Jackson. Wait,
Yep.
that's why they're calling him that? Not because he looks like he ran face first into a stone wall?
Yep.
Apparently not. Worse yet, the North had also lost the first major battle out west, giving away control of southwest Missouri. All of this was terrible news for Abraham Lincoln, especially since many of his generals and cabinet already didn't have much respect for him. They felt he was incapable.
Yeah, most of them did not have respect for him since he looked like a grandpa. He was actually still fairly young. Because at the time he was in his 40s or 50s, so he's still fairly young compared to most. But most of them, like Stanton, was originally a Democrat, so that's why they were. He was like a grandpa.
Of running a war, because he seemed a bit like your friendly old grandpa. He famously loved a long-winded story and a good pun.
Yeah.
I've been so busy, my wife is missing me. But her aim is starting to
That's
improve. But deep down, few realized he could also be incredibly shrewd. Oh, Abe, you're so funny. Funny how? Funny like I'm a clown? Abe, I was just... No, funny how?
Yeah,
Like I'm
he's
here to
so-
amuse you? During the war,
Best politician that's ever been president of the US is
Lincoln committed acts that were viewed by some as impeachable. His administration suppressed the free media from printing articles sympathetic
and many Southern sympathizers were arrested without trial, and so it was. So what else?
towards the South. Some Southern sympathizers were even arrested without a trial. Lincoln's criticizers began accusing him of being a tyrant. But to quote the man himself, hey,
people saw him as a tyrant for the first 2 years. Hey, it's war, baby. What are you going to do? Lincoln probably.
it's war, baby. What are you gonna do? By the end of 1861, with things already looking bad for the North, abolitionists such as Frederick Douglass couldn't believe that the Union Army weren't enlisting black men. He continued to put pressure on Lincoln to make the war about emancipation. Mr. President, it's time to make the war about emancipation. I don't want to ruffle any feathers. The feathers are already ruffled. But Lincoln, hanging on to hope for a quick end to the conflict, continued to fight only for the preservation of the Union. It was decided, however.
Then we contraband with the escaped slaves. Then the ruffled feathers thing. So and then European powers wanted to get involved, such as the UK, France, maybe Spain, because they were missing their supply of southern cotton, and most of the South was known as the cotton states of the US.
That escaped slaves from the Confederacy could be held as enemy contraband, and many of these men were put to work bolstering the Union's infrastructure and supply lines. Hoping to get things moving, Lincoln made young General George McClellan the new commanding general.
Arrogant idiot, basically. I mean, he ran for president in 1864, but I mean, he was like the worst general the Union had for like a century. Literally, I'd consider him that. That's how bad he was.
And McClellan began to train up his men. He thought a lot of himself, however, and believed he was going to be the nation's great savior. And like many others, he didn't approve of the president's handling of the war. On one occasion, Lincoln went to McClellan's house to meet with him, but McClellan was late returning home. He kept the president waiting, and when he finally got there, he just straight up went to bed.
And that's exactly what happened.
Now that's what I call disrespectful. McClellan talked the talk, but could he walk the walk? No. Like Lincoln's other generals, McClellan was maddeningly cautious.
He was very cautious.
Could you move south and attack the enemy? What? Are you crazy? What if they have a big...
And Grant, who came not after him, but he came about 2 years after he was fired in the East. Grant moved to the East 2 years after McClellan was fired. Even though the Confederates inflicted massive casualties, he's kept moving in. While for McClellan, if the Confederates inflicted 1,000 losses, he'd retreat. But there was also the siege of Williamsburg, the Confederates had 8,000 men there, while the Unions had 50,000, and then they put the Confederates to siege. But the army general made the army look bigger, so not really his fault.
Scary army down there. They probably do.
This one.
What? Oh my gosh! McClellan worried that he did not have the numbers he needed to fight effectively. What if they have like 10,000 men? Okay, no problem. We'll get you 20,000 men. Well, what if they have 30,000 men? I'll need 40. Okay, you can have 40. Well, what if they have 50? I'll need 60.
If they have 50,000
Lincoln tried,
men,
but it was all.
if they have 50,000 men, you can just get 50,000 and 10 men or something. 10 men more.
All in vain. McClellan would not make a move for the rest of the year. The North's one saving grace for now was a general out west fighting in Kentucky and Tennessee, General Ulysses S. Grant. Cool, collected, methodical, and a big fan of whiskey. His chief of staff took it upon himself to keep Grant sober.
Yeah, and he got drunk a lot. When he was bored, he got drunk. But
one officer said that.
But when he had to fight, like his army had to fight, he was ready.
Grant habitually wore an expression as though he were determined to drive his head through a brick wall and was about to do it. And that determination led him to score a number of key victories when others around him were failing. At the Battle of Fort Donelson, Grant was like, "Why does Stonewall Jackson get a cool nickname and I don't? I want a cool nickname." Sir, the Confederates say they're ready to surrender and want to know your terms. No terms, just unconditional surrender. Hey, unconditional surrender Grant. That's a pretty cool nickname, right? Guys, right? Later in April 1862, the Confederates launched a sudden attack on Grant's army at Shiloh, but the determined, unconditional surrender Grant threw his lines at the rebels and sent them running. The battle resulted in the heaviest casualties in U.S. history so far.
And all the wars fought until that point, not including the Civil War, had casualties up to this. So casualties that the U.S. since the American Civil War had the highest number of casualties of all wars, even though World War I and World War II. But the only reason it had that is that both sides were considered Americans. Yeah, American, yeah.
And despite his victory, Grant found himself under fire. You have to get rid of Grant. Why? Didn't he win? Yes, but he just threw.
Yeah, and if Lincoln had fired him, the South may have actually had a chance at winning.
Threw his men at the enemy. Isn't that the point? Also, he's a loony drunk. Well, what does he like to drink? I believe whiskey, sir. Then send him more. Lincoln watched as his cabinet did nothing but bicker, and his generals did nothing. But then, worst of all, personal tragedy struck. Lincoln's young son, Willie, very much loved by the president, died of typhoid fever at the age of 11. Lincoln was a sensitive man and was heavily affected by the loss. His wife was inconsolable. But one of Lincoln's...
His wife wasn't inconsolable. His wife was literally almost borderline insane. She'd have long fits of insanity. So, yeah.
Greatest traits, what made him such a great leader, was in the darkest of times, with composure and determination. He kept moving forward. He knew it was his responsibility to hold himself and his family together. And by doing so, he hoped to hold the nation together. And he had it with McClellan's inaction. Lincoln decided he was going to take control. In March 1862, Lincoln firmly ordered McClellan to once again move south towards Richmond.
And then he went on the Peninsula campaign. Since he conquered this bit from Virginia, McClellan wanted his troops to go from here onto the Virginia Peninsula, which is here, and then attack from the southeast.
Richmond. McClellan insisted instead they move by sea to the Virginia Peninsula and attack Richmond from the southeast. Yes, said Lincoln. Okay, anything. Lincoln held on to some of McClellan's men to defend D.C. from a nearby Stonewall Jackson wreaking havoc in the Shenandoah Valley.
Yeah, Fremont was on the Republican candidate, so now he was a Union general. Then Banks moved out.
And he sent McClellan south. McClellan landed on the peninsula, and he began to move inland. He came up against a small Confederate army that had dug in at Yorktown. McClellan vastly outnumbered the force, but it said that Confederate...
Yorktown. I think it was Williamsburg or Yorktown.
General Magruder deceived McClellan by cleverly maneuvering his smaller force and making McClellan believe he faced a huge army. No, you have way more men than them. Move forward. No. McClellan settled in for a month-long siege, giving time for Johnston to move south from Manassas and Magruder time to retreat. When he finally entered the city and found it deserted, he declared it a victory, calling his success brilliant. Then, after meeting some resistance at Williamsburg, McClellan moved to within just 20 miles of Richmond, his armies able to hear the church bells ringing in the enemy capital. You still outnumber them. Go give him hell. No. McClellan McClellan once again held back, moving slowly.
If McClellan had actually attacked, and he could have taken over Richmond and could have shortened the war by 2 years and saved like 300,000 men from dying. So yeah.
And defensively, and with his army split in two, the Confederates saw an opportunity to strike back. McClellan's advance was halted, and now the Confederates pulled an ace out of their sleeve. General Lee, you're up. Do you think we should evacuate Richmond? No, Mr. President, no need. General Robert E. Lee, one of the most brilliant military commanders of the time, was now in charge.
Along with Ulysses S. Grant and Hamilton one more time.
One of his biggest strengths was his ability to read the mind of his enemy, and he knew McClellan was cautious and weak. After moving Stonewall Jackson south to join him, and even though he had a smaller army, Lee hit.
And Jackson was terrible in the campaign of the 7 Pines. Well, it was no campaign per se, they were defending, but Jackson was terrible in that 2 weeks that he was there.
Hit McClellan in a series of fast-paced, close combat battles that had McClellan spooked. McClellan retreated the Union Army back again and again and again, escaping the peninsula and returning to D.C. Lee had defeated McClellan, and the campaign had failed. Well, that was a major success. A success? Tell me exactly what was successful about that. Well, we successfully retreated. You lost. I didn't lose. I merely failed to win.
And that's exactly what he said. I merely failed to win.
Things just kept looking worse for the North. At least their Navy had seen some success, capturing a number of key port cities, notably when they steamrolled past Confederate forts to...
And New Orleans is by far the biggest city in the South, easily. I mean, a lot of the main industrial... I'll just give a quick one. The reason New Orleans was the biggest city in the South is because it was the entrance to the Mississippi. The Mississippi was the economic artery of the South. So it would just go up the Mississippi, up to the more the central Confederacy, and then just get shipped out by rail.
Take New Orleans. And speaking of the Navy, both sides had begun using ironclads. So that's...
These weren't the first ironclads invented. Ironclads had been invented in France a decade earlier, so yeah.
Pretty cool. But in the East, they still weren't having any luck. After McClellan's disastrous campaign, Lincoln briefly sent out one General John Pope.
And Pope was his friend.
To attack Northern Virginia. Hey man, just checking in. How's it going? Well, the Confederates kicked my butt at Cedar Mountain. Then they raided my camp and ran off with my money and clothes. Also, I appear to have been wedgied. Lee defeated Pope at yet another battle at Bull Run, in which nearby farm families once again got caught up in the fighting. Hurry up, Martha! There's another war out here! I'm waiting for my hair to dry! Wilmer McLean, sick of war, moved his family south, where he knew the war would...
And I don't want to tell this too early, but I really want to. Wilmer McLean actually said this once. He said this once, that the war had started in my backyard and ended in my house. Because it started at Bull Run and he lived in the city of Manassas, so that's why he said backyard. And the reason he said ended in my house is because General Robert E. Lee surrendered his army of Virginia in the Appomattox courthouse. But the war wasn't really over. I mean, it was like 100% the North was going to win, but the Confederates didn't surrender.
Definitely, absolutely, never touch him again. But Lincoln had yet another problem to contend with. European powers, in particular the UK, were looking increasingly like they may intervene diplomatically on the side of the Confederates. They were missing their precious supply of southern cotton because of the Union blockade, and they wanted to see a swift conclusion to the war. The tension between America and Great Britain had been increasing, especially after Confederate diplomats were discovered on a British ship. Now, after McClellan's failure to take Richmond, the UK declared it impossible
List
for
of
the...
impossible things. Lick your elbow, I can do that. Okay, I can't eat my own face. I'm uploading videos right now. I can do that. The North to win. Okay, they actually did do that.
North to win. Lincoln needed something to prevent Europe from getting involved, and after more petitioning from abolitionists, he decided maybe the time was finally right to make the war about ending the institution he hated, slavery.
Yeah, but his cabinet actually suggested the idea first.
If the North had a noble cause to fight for, Europe would be less likely to intervene. But Lincoln and his cabinet knew before they could declare something as radical as emancipation, they needed a victory, especially now that the Confederates were about to go on the attack. Aware that he had a limited number of men and supplies, Lee now hoped that if he could just threaten Washington, D.C. militarily, he would gain Europe's recognition and crush Northern morale in time for the midterm elections, forcing the North to negotiate. With confidence at an all-time high, for the first...
If Lincoln and his vice president were actually captured, it would be like a 95% chance the Confederates would win and the Union would sue for peace. But that didn't happen at all, so yeah.
First time, Robert E. Lee invaded the North. But on September 13th, the North finally had some luck. Oh boy, it's my lucky day. A cigar in a field. Hey, what's this wrapped around it? Oh my.
It was actually wrapped around some like 3 or 4 cigars, but then they figured out General Lee's war plans.
My gosh! That's right. The North had discovered General Lee's battle plans wrapped around some cigars, and in them, they saw that Lee had split up his forces. McClellan headed out from D.C., and the two sides met in the Battle of Antietam, a crucial battle that would decide the course of the war. It saw the most
highest single-day casualties, excluding natural disasters.
Vicious fighting to date, and still remain.
But had the casualties, deaths and wounded of 9/11 D-Day and the bombing of Pearl Harbor. The confusing thing with casualties is that casualties can sometimes be interpreted as deaths, even though they sometimes aren't deaths. Like one human can suffer like 5 casualties. They can be wounded 5 times in the battle. They can be wounded 4 times in the battle and then killed. So if they're killed, they can't have any more casualties than that. So yeah.
The single bloodiest day in American history. But for once, the North came out victorious, and Lee was forced to retreat. He's on the run. Chase him down and finish him off.
Obliterated
No. You know what, old buddy, old pal? You're fired. The North had won their crucial victory. Lincoln breathed a huge sigh of relief, and with that win, he was prepared to take a huge step. On September 22nd, the Emancipation Proclamation was issued. In January, all slaves held in the Confederate States would be, as far as the U.S. government was concerned, official.
And they only said about the Confederate States. If the Union conquered them, the slaves would be free. They didn't say it about Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, Delaware. They could enjoy slavery. But the only reason they didn't say that is because if they had said that, they might have rebelled. And Washington, D.C. was like, I don't know, it's not really part of Maryland. But if Maryland rebelled, then it would completely separate from Union territory, and then they most probably move the capital to New York or Philadelphia.
Officially free. Throughout the North, free black men and women rejoiced, knowing that if the North were to win, their brothers and sisters would no longer be held in bondage. The proclamation also had the intended effect on Europe, who were not willing to oppose a pledge to end slavery. An outraged Confederacy knew that Lincoln had given the war a new meaning. It was no longer just about the preservation of the Union. Now, it was about creating a new Union, washed clean of its original sin. A Union without slavery.
Okay, I have talked for a long time. I feel like this video is over 45 minutes, which is long, but yeah. So guys, so thanks for watching. Link to the original video in the description. And yeah. So, what? Oh yeah, and I think I also said I'll keep something else in the description. I forgot what. Can you guys just remind me, and I'll put in the description again. Once you guys remind me, I'll just add it on. Thanks for watching and bye.